Before we get into today's show, make sure you hit that sub button for daily Dolphins coverage. We have had 26 subscribers. That's the most subs we've gotten on one video in the month of June. My bosses and I want to top that. So hit that sub button and let's get to 30 on today's video. And coming up on today's show, we have a major Jalen Ramsey update, plus more rumors surrounding Dolphins cornerback targets that could replace Jalen Ramsey. So this is why you subscribe, and let's get into today's show. As I mentioned before the intro, we are going to be talking a lot about Jalen Ramsey today, and the Dolphins are continuing to show interest in NFL free agent cornerback Rasul Douglas. I am Nic Rohloff. This is Dolphins Today by Chat Sports, and this all started when Ian Rapoport sent out a tweet on Sunday morning. Not really with anything that was stunning, but it more or less confirmed a lot of different things. The initial tweet and report, if you will, was that as the Dolphins and Jalen Ramsey work towards a trade, Ramsey is not going to attend mandatory minicamp this week. Minicamp begins on June 10th, Tuesday, runs through Thursday, June 12th, so 3 days of minicamp. We'll have coverage on that. But he's staying away. And I'll say this, it should come to absolute no surprise that he's not going to be there. We said he wasn't going to be there the last couple of weeks. Like, there was no surprise he wasn't at OTAs. Those are voluntary. Mandatory minicamp is mandatory for players unless you are in this type of scenario, because usually he would get fined by not showing up, but it will likely be an excused absence. It's just further evidence that this relationship is cooked past the point of no return. I know there are a lot of people in the comments and on Twitter that have asked, hey, if we don't get the right compensation for a Ramsey trade, is there a world where they don't deal him away and they just keep him on the roster and then they force him to play for Miami in the fall because, well, is he just going to forfeit a year of his career? I don't think we're going to get to that point, and it just, to me, is a little bit unrealistic. Like, a trade is going to happen. Now, I will say this. I am a little bit shocked that it has not happened yet. We were all circling that June 1st calendar date was obviously last Sunday, and I thought it was going to happen in the first 48 to 72 hours. I said that on the show. Hand up, I was wrong. It sounded like there was just like a agreement and just waiting for that deadline to pass so Miami could get the financial benefits of that $9.9 million cap hit not being there, and now you ultimately have a $23 million in cap space. But ultimately, there isn't another team intertwined with Miami right now on serious trade talks regarding Jalen Ramsey. And this might actually take longer than expected now. NFL front office usually take breaks during the season. I mean, you get a little break after the year, assuming that you don't have to hire a new coach or a new GM, and then you get into scouting season, right? You get a little bit of break after the draft, then you get a little bit of break during the offseason, and we have another one coming up. After mandatory minicamp this week, NFL front offices usually take a 2 or 3 week hiatus until early July when they get back into the building before training camp, the couple weeks leading up to that. And then obviously training camp begins. They're always there. And then you get to the preseason. The season ultimately begins. So if you don't get a trade this week during mandatory minicamp week, it might not happen until the early parts of July, which would catch me by surprise, but hey, you never know. So let me ask you this. Predict it. Make the call. Will Jalen Ramsey be traded this week? If it doesn't happen this week, I don't think it will happen until the end of the month or early July. So it's now or never. If it's happening soon, will he get traded this week? Type Y for yes or type N for no. Now, I will say this. If you are another football team, like say the Los Angeles Rams, who have been linked to Jalen Ramsey trade talks a lot throughout this entire process, wouldn't you want him in your building going into mandatory minicamp? Now, it's a little bit too late for that because most teams' minicamp is this week, and if you trade for him on Monday, then he's likely not going to be ready to roll until the back half of minicamp if it's later in the week. So, like, Yeah, it probably doesn't mean anything now, but it just kind of goes to the point of like, I'm shocked that a team hasn't just ponied up and made the trade to get Ramsey acclimated to their defense, their scheme, and their coaching staff and their locker room. But the same thing could also be said for the Miami Dolphins. And what do I mean by that? Well, the Dolphins are clearly going to sign a cornerback to replace Jalen Ramsey because this roster is just not up to par in that department. We've often talked about Rasul Douglas and many other players we'll talk about a little bit later on today's show. But wouldn't you want that free agent veteran to be in your building for mandatory minicamp? You would think so. And I have finally done it, folks. If you've watched our content over the past month, ever since the Jalen Ramsey trade stuff has begun, I have kept him on the Dolphins CB depth chart and said, like, hey, it's just only a matter of time. Well, it's just so clear that he is not going to return at this point under any circumstances, so I have officially taken him off the depth chart. And without Jalen Ramsey, it is as ugly as it gets. It is the worst cornerback room in the NFL. Like, no disrespect to these players because, listen, they're professionals. They're getting paid. Some of them were high draft picks. Some of them were undrafted. Most of them were undrafted, a.k.a. Storm Duck and Kader Kohou. But it's the worst CB room in the NFL. And, like, no disrespect, but if Kader Kohou, who is a prototypical nickel corner, not someone that could really play on the outside, is your best guy, that's a legit issue. And the fact that the Dolphins have to play Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Drake May, Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, Jaden Daniels this season, and if they hypothetically wanted to make the playoffs, having that weak of a corner room is a major, major concern. So it's obvious they are going to sign someone or trade for someone after losing Ramsey, but I would like that to be sooner rather than later so they can start getting acclimated to this defense and this scheme. And I'll say this, folks, when Jalen Ramsey gets traded, we will be going live on the channel. So make sure you have subscribed if you haven't already. Also turn on those notifications so you don't miss a piece of content we put out. We're on the path to 71K subs. Let's get there because we have a lot to talk about. Now, when Jalen Ramsey gets traded, there will be replacements that the Dolphins come into contact with and try to add to the roster. I think these are the top 5 guys in NFL free agency at this point. Rasul Douglas, Asante Samuel Jr., Stephon Gilmore, James Bradberry, and Mike Hilton. We've talked about some of these players more than others, a.k.a. Douglas and Asante Samuel Jr., and I will continue to say that I believe that Rasul Douglas, out of that list of 5 players, is the most likely to be a Dolphin this upcoming season. The reason why I say that is, well, it seems like Miami has the most interest in him. Out of all 5 of those players, there's only been one of them to visit Dolphins headquarters. That was Rasul Douglas. That happened about a month ago. And Barry Jackson had a report today. It really wasn't anything crazy, just an update in his article about Jalen Ramsey, saying that the Dolphins have maintained contact with veteran free agent cornerback Rasul Douglas, who rejected an offer from the Dolphins earlier this month. And that comes to no surprise. We know that he rejected an offer from Miami after their initial visit to headquarters in early and mid-May. So we know that his want financially isn't where Miami is willing to go. Maybe that's because a trade for Ramsey has not come through yet. Right now, the Dolphins have about $13.7 million in cap space. After a Jalen Ramsey trade, that balloons up to $23.6. So maybe after a Ramsey trade, the Dolphins are willing to offer slightly more money because they have slightly more cap space, and Douglas ultimately signs, or they try to preserve the cap space to sign Douglas and another free agent corner. Because as much as I think Rasul Douglas would help the Dolphins, because we just don't have a lot at that position, it's not like Douglas is some elite corner. He was actually one of the worst coverage corners in the entire NFL a season ago. You see how much he was targeted, how many completions he allowed, a QB rating of 124.1. Just in case you didn't know, 153 is perfect. So quarterbacks had a lot of success targeting Mr. Rasul Douglas. Now, I have said this consistently, but if you are watching for the first time, I think Douglas would fit better in Miami than he did with Buffalo a year ago. Douglas is primarily a zone corner, and he struggles in man coverage. when the Bills traded for Douglas in 2023 and he thrived after the deadline, is because they played a lot of zone coverage. This past year, new defensive coordinator in Buffalo, they played slightly more man coverage, which I think ultimately hurt Rasul Douglas's production and coverage ability because he's a bigger corner, he's getting older, he's past his 30s, so he's not that nimble, he's not as fluid as he was in his early mid-20s, and I think playing predominantly man ultimately hurts him. We've talked about it before, but the Dolphins run cover 2, top 5 most in the entire NFL. Anthony Weaver went to that a lot last season. They run 65%. That's a rough estimate of zone defense and coverages against pass plays as well. So I think Douglas and Miami do make a lot of sense. He's got that prototypical outside corner build that allows Kader Kohou to stay where he's the best at, inside, and then you'd have to make the decision on who is your CB2. Are you going to sign, trade another person, or is it going to be the battle for Storm Duck or Cam Smith? Let me ask you this before we close out today's show. Do you want Rasul Douglas? We showed some stats, a little brief breakdown here. We've talked about him a lot. Type S for sign, type P for pass. Let me know if you want to bring in the former Buffalo Bill. What I want, and I've been very vocal about this all offseason long, I want to sign Rasul Douglas and Asante Samuel Jr. The Dolphins have reached out to Samuel Jr. They have not really exchanged numbers. They have not brought him in for a visit. That is likely also going to start happening in July when he has another checkup with that neck surgery he had in early April. That has been widely reported that the Asante Samuel Jr. discussions around the league and free agency won't happen until July. So I wouldn't hate trading Ramsey this week, signing Rasul Douglas, and then seeing what's up with Asante Samuel Jr. in July. If not, maybe I'll just sign Rasul Douglas and trade for another corner. Greg Newsome is reported to be on the market. You could maybe go with Kansas City and see what's up with Jalen Watson. There's a lot of trade rumors with him. I think there are also good options on the trade market. Not many, just a few. And Miami could look to do that. The point is this. I don't trust the current group. We showed the depth chart earlier. I mean, Kader Kohou, Storm Duck, and Cam Smith are your top 3 corners. Just can't happen, man. I mean, it just can't. If you're serious about trying to win this year, which unfortunately the front office and coaching staff needs to be, because if they do not make the playoffs for a second straight year, and even if they make it and get embarrassed in the playoffs, Chris Grier, Mike McDaniel, Tua, well, they could all be gone by this time next year. So they need to win this year, whether you like it or not. And I think it would be very much helpful to have a resolution on Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith. I want to keep Jonnu Smith. I've been very open about that. But if you do trade Jonnu and you trade Jalen Ramsey, you would then have about $28 million in cap space to acquire another player in free agency or trade, whether they want to trade for a tight end. The point is this. Having a resolution on those two, and then if you're paying Jonnu a little bit more, you're trading Ramsey, and when, it will just give you more opportunities to make the right adjustments to this roster heading into training camp in mid to late July, which to me is an absolute necessity, which is why you need to subscribe. As we mentioned throughout the show, we are going to have consistent daily content on the latest surrounding Miami, when things happen, who could be replaced, where do these players go, who stays, who doesn't. Hit the sub button today for daily content.